I can't actually remember another budget quite like this. So in between Rachel Reeves standing up there, she's outside Downing Street, that's just before the budget, the famous photo, and her actually getting to Parliament, the entire contents of the budget were inadvertently released by the Office of Budget Responsibility. It's just crazy moments. I haven't ever experienced anything like it. And just look at what it did to financial markets. Because, in the scheme of things, who knows what is the big historic moment for this budget. But certainly, this was unprecedented. The report, when it came out, this is showing you where the 10-year government bond yield, which is a decent metric of what people want to charge the UK government to lend it money. And of course, you'll remember when the mini-budget happened, that shot up higher. Now, have a look at what happened. News of that report came out. People suddenly downloading it, trying to see what's going on. Is this going to be a disaster for the UK? Is it going to be good? And you can see the cost of borrowing yo-yoing around, kind of like crazy. But here's what's interesting. Look at where it kind of ended the day. So you had this roller coaster, but then it ended the day down. And we'll come back to that in a second, because that is significant. But first of all, let's just go through kind of, the big picture of this budget. And the big picture always has to start with how well is the economy doing right now? And for that, the short answer is kind of better, but also worse. So this is showing you economic growth each year, the next few years, just total economic growth. So it's not GDP per capita. This obviously needs to be shared amongst the entire population. But it's a pretty good measure of just how well off or not we're getting each year. Let's look at the latest numbers. That was last time around. This time, the red bars upgrade in the first year, 2025, the year we're in at the moment. But look at each of the following years. So weaker growth every year of the forecast horizon. The economy is just weaker. It's weaker than previously expected. And when the economy is weaker than expected, all else equal, that means you're not getting in as much tax revenue, and that has an effect on the public finances. And when it comes to the public finances, perhaps the best metric for just judging how well they're doing is this. It's the deficit. It's public sector net borrowing. And it wasn't that long ago that £100 billion worth of public sector net borrowing was considered a lot of borrowing. Well, right now, this year, we're due to borrow more than £100 billion, 117, £118 billion. How did that change this time around? Bear in mind those growth numbers I showed you a moment ago are kind of weaker. Well, look, we are borrowing more. More this year, more next year, more the year after that. And here's what's kind of interesting. So more borrowing, and then all of a sudden, in 2029 to 30, that bar is lower. So what's going on there? Basically, that is the point where most of these taxes, the difficult stuff, suddenly kicks in. So it's all right, it's kind of not too many changes there, and then suddenly a lot of these taxes that we'll talk about in a second actually kick in. But let me just kind of give you the point in a nutshell of kind of where we are and why we're in this situation. And it kind of comes back to this. You will probably remember the amount we've been talking about it recently, the idea of headroom. And what does headroom mean? Basically, Rachel Reeves has all these fiscal rules, well, two big fiscal rules, basically. One of them is she needs to keep the current budget in surplus by the end of the forecast horizon, so in 4 years' time or so. And last time around, she was just about in surplus. The budget was in surplus by £9.9 billion. And as you know, all sorts of things have dug into that. So there have been all these U-turns, that extra spending on welfare, particularly winter fuel allowance, that mean that isn't as high as that because you've got to do all that spending. You've also got the fact that the Office of Budget Responsibility think the economy's not doing so well. So what happened to this? Well, so you've got those OBR, that's kind of £9.9 billion. You've got those OBR downgrades, forecast downgrades. That kind of sliced a bit off this. So that's suddenly 9.9 is down to 4.2 billion. And then the government said, OK, well, in response to that, we are going to raise taxes. And we're not going to raise taxes a little, we are going to raise taxes a lot. £26.1 billion worth of extra taxes. Think back to that chart I showed you a moment ago, where all of a sudden in 2029-30, which is this year we're looking at, suddenly things get better. Well, that's basically this. That's the taxes, OK? And then you've got to kind of take off from that. So that takes her headroom to what looks like about £30 billion. But then you've got to bear in mind the fact that she's got a bit of extra spending, mostly stuff on welfare. I'll show you that in a second. And then also, if you're going to be taxing the economy more, then broadly speaking, you can expect growth to be weaker, which is kind of what's happened. But the long and the short of it is, and this is why markets, that line kind of went down, the long and the short of it is, this time around, she ends this whole process with not £9.9 billion of headroom against her fiscal rules, but £20 billion. And I think that's the thing. It's less likely now that she's going to have to come back. I mean, never say never. She's going to have to come back with another one of these budgets in the future. But as I say, let's just go through very quickly spending and taxes, because this is where things are striking and where you get a sense of where was all that extra, or where will all that extra spending actually go. This is showing you, just between now and the end of the kind of forecast, so the next 5 years, where that extra spending is going. So it's £32.1 billion extra spending over that period. Let's break it down. So you've got some money on local government, some money on capital spending, some money on other departmental spending, some more extra money on debt interest, because interest rates are a little bit higher. But by far and away, the biggest chunk of this extra spending is welfare. So the government is spending more on welfare. It's primarily the two-child cap, but it's also some of those other measures it wasn't able to get through. £16 billion. By far and away, the biggest chunk is welfare. So it's spending more on welfare, and it is taxing in order to finance that. Now, this is showing you taxation. It's just not entirely comparable because this is just for 1 year rather than for the whole period. The last thing was the whole period. This is just 1 year. But the key thing to note here is, again, here we have a big block. Let's break it down and work out where all those taxes are actually coming from. And the short answer to this, it's mostly the freezes to the tax thresholds. So extra money coming in because everyone is being taxed more. Well, pretty much everyone is being taxed more because the point at which you start paying tax is frozen for another couple of years. And then because wage inflation is going up, proportionately everyone ends up paying more in tax. So income tax is by far and away the biggest thing. People are paying more in income tax, whatever you hear from the Labour Party. But also, here's what's interesting as well. That salary sacrifice thing, which basically means that pretty much, or the majority of people, millions of people, you are very likely to be one of them. If you have a job in the private sector, if you have a pension scheme, there's defined contribution, there's a really good chance that that is arranged in the form of salary sacrifice. And you are going to be taxed more on that. And what's significant about that number, £4.7 billion, it's a big number. It's a big number. So this may go down as a very big stealth tax, and we'll just have to see how that goes down in the future. On top of that, you've got things like property savings tax. Two other things just to know. EV taxes. So if you have an electric vehicle, you're going to be taxed on it, and taxed on the amount of miles that you drive, and it's not entirely clear how that's going to be administered at the moment, or how easily that's going to be administered. And finally, the mansion tax. Now, there's been so much coverage about the mansion tax, but what to me is significant is how little it raises in comparison to everything else. It's only £400 million. So a lot of noise, but not raising all that much money, which I guess is not that surprising because it's only affecting quite a small proportion of property. But put all that together, loads of taxes, and what is the net impact of this? The net impact is that the tax burden, taxes as a percentage of GDP, is going up. And this line is showing you the tax burden. The higher the line is, the more taxed we are as an economy. All taxes, by the way, not just kind of property taxes, not just individual taxes. Back at the time of the last election, this is where it looked like it was heading under the Tories. OK, so it was heading higher under the Tories. This is more or less where Labour said they were going to kind of leave it. So it's kind of 37 and a bit percent of GDP. And this is where it was after the last budget. So you can see how each time a budget happens, Labour are actually pushing taxes higher, the government pushing taxes higher than was promised in the manifesto. And now look where it's pledged to go after this budget. An extraordinary leap. And you can see how it just goes higher and higher to 38% of GDP. Just to put that into perspective, I mean, first of all, look at the gap between that and just ask yourself, you know, were people aware when they kind of read the Labour manifesto, if they did, that actually the real picture in the UK was going to be considerably different? Interesting question. But secondly, compare the UK with other countries around the world. Look, this is the UK. Other countries around the OECD, look, France, by far and away the most taxed nation. This is, again, it's just showing you taxation as a percentage of GDP. There's the UK kind of middle of the pack. There's Ireland at the bottom, and the US is somewhere down the bottom as well. The net result of all of this, look at the red bar, is to send that red bar higher. So we kind of go from being middle of the pack in terms of taxation to being kind of slightly higher, slightly in the top half. And I think a lot of people would think that's fair enough, but nonetheless, there's a question about how sustainable that is, and we've never been in this territory before. Britain's going from being low, kind of middle tax, to slightly higher tax, kind of close to Germany. So we'll have to see how that eventuates. But here is one chart that's pretty striking. This is basically showing you the change in taxation over the course of parliaments going back to the 1970s. There were parliaments, particularly Conservatives, in the early 1970s and also that was a barber boom there, and the early 1980s, where over the course of the parliament, taxes fell. And then you've got parliaments where taxes rose. That was Gordon Brown in 2005 to 10, where a lot of money was raised to try and fund public services. Look at where we are, only after 2 budgets in this parliament. Have a look at this. Right now, we are headed to be, for this parliament to be the biggest increase in taxation that we have seen going back to the 1970s. So pretty striking there in terms of the change in taxation in the UK. But as I say, put all of that together, and markets quite like this. So final chart to look at. This is basically showing you the average movement in the UK 10-year government bond yield after budgets, going back quite a long way. So we're going back to the 1990s here. And here's the key thing to look at. Look, this budget, the bond yields went down. And the reason that matters is because when they go higher, often it's a sign that people are concerned. They went higher. This area here is just showing you the average in previous budgets. They went higher in the last budget. And actually, the Chancellor got quite concerned about that because that was investors getting concerned about the fact that she hadn't left herself all that much headroom. But it was nothing in comparison to the most famous of all kind of bond yield moments after any budget recently, which was the mini budget of 2022, which, look, that went through the sky. So I think all told, the Chancellor will probably be very happy that that line has gone down quite considerably, particularly when you kind of compare it to other countries. The big question, though, is take it all together, take that big increase in the taxation burden, and how sustainable is that? And how well will that go down with the voters as well?